so to begin with chapter 13, we're going to talk about aggregate planning. And aggregate planning, and again, I'm pulling these are the exact PowerPoints from Wally Plus. And these PowerPoints are going to be very helpful. So as you are continuing to read the content within Wally Plus, it's also going to be important to go within the study aid section of Wally Plus to download these PowerPoint documents. Okay, so I am purposely performing this discussion off of the exact same PowerPoints that you will see within Wally Plus. Okay, so as we're talking about aggregate planning is somewhat of a long-term plan for an organization. So within the aggregate plan, the operations plan and the marketing plan is an input to that aggregate plan. And the main thing that is important with the aggregate plan is that there are essentially three different approaches to the aggregate plan. But before we get to that, I want to highlight how the short-term planning, those day-to-day operations for the organization, is a part of that short-term plan, that weekly, daily operational plan. Okay, so those metrics that you see within your organization are a part of that short-term plan. When we get into the medium-term 16 to 18-month plans, that's where the aggregate plan falls in. And as an aggregate plan, you also have sales and operations planning. And to provide you with a high-level overview of sales and operations planning, it is the collaboration of departments within the organization so that we are all on one accord in terms of identifying the budget that should be allocated to produce the product or service. We are on the same page in terms of the inventory that we should carry. We're all on board in terms of the forecast that we're working off of. Because if we are all in agreement with the forecast, now we're able to reduce our inventory levels. We're able to have that lean thinking in which we discuss in other chapters within this course. Okay, and the aggregate plan falls into that. Okay, now 3 of the strategies is a level strategy, a chase strategy, and a hybrid strategy. And with a level strategy or a level aggregate plan, I always say that I want to, and another important piece with these plans is that you can look at it from a workforce perspective, or you could also look at it from a product perspective. Okay, so with an aggregate plan, I want to look at my demand, and I want to create a level load of employees. I want to create a level load of products that I produce. So what I mean by that is that I can look long term in the future. So that's where that medium term plan comes into play, where I'm going to look 6 to 18 months out, and I'm going to say, okay, what is my proposed demand going to be in the future? If I have a proposed demand, now I can say, okay, in order to meet those monthly targets, those monthly expectations, I'm going to have to load my workers to this particular level, and I'm not deviating from that level. The same thing holds true for my materials. If I have my long-term plan of how much materials that I think I'm going to need based on demand, if Amazon, for example, has an idea of how many, I have a 3-month-old at the house. If I know Amazon knows how many cases of gripe water, because gripe water is showing up at my house every single day, that they're going to need around the world, they're able to reach out to the manufacturer of gripe water to say, okay, we think we're going to need this much inventory. So now that manufacturer can actually level load their plan and they don't deviate from it. So that is the benefit of a level plan, of a level strategy, in that I know what my costs are going to be. I know what my output's going to be. But the downfall is that I could have stockouts. I could have excess inventory. Because I've already identified the number of people that I need for these 6 months, these 7 months, if we look at this example here, I may have situations where I need more people because the demand increased, or I may be overproducing essentially because I have these workers and I'm going to keep these workers on the shift. So I may be overproducing, which will lead to excess inventory. So you have benefits and drawbacks to this level plan, this level strategy, but that level strategy is essentially saying that I'm going to look at my demand, my future demand. I'm going to look at my forecast. I'm going to set my employee levels, my worker levels. I'm not deviating from those levels. On the inventory perspective, I am going to produce 4,000 eaches every month. I'm not deviating from those 4,000. So that's that level strategy. So with a chase strategy, the easiest way that I have people understand the chase strategy is that I always say that I'm chasing my demand. So I'm chasing my demand in that in a hospital environment, I have my number of occupied beds. I have nurses on call. So instead of always having 15 nurses for each shift, I may adjust. I have nurses on call and have them adjust based on how many occupied beds I have. So you're going to have peaks and lows in terms of how many employees you're going to have on a particular shift because you're chasing that demand, you're chasing those occupied beds, and you're going to have peaks and lows in terms of the products you produce. So for example, a make to order strategy in the manufacturing facility is common. So it's very difficult to forecast, when a customer is going to place an order within a make to order environment. It's somewhat like an impulse environment. Before Tesla built these gigafactories, so I'm waiting for my Cybertruck to roll off the factory line. Before they built these gigafactories, they had a make to order strategy. So it was very difficult for Tesla to forecast how many cars they're going to buy at a given time. So they had this make to order strategy that would bring workers on whenever cars needed to be produced, and then they would lay workers off when that demand was low, for example. So that's where the chase strategy, where I chase my demand, and that's where we're going to increase and decrease our workforce, and we can also increase and decrease our production levels and production capacities when it comes to the inventory from an inventory perspective. Okay. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I can't see the chat at this point, but once I do the hybrid strategy, I will look at the chats and see if there's any questions on this before we move on to the planning section of this discussion. So the last strategy is a hybrid strategy. So it's going to be a combination of the level strategy as well as the chase strategy. And the best way in which I can describe this is that I establish my baseline. So I establish my baseline of nurses, my 15 nurses. And then as my demand comes to fruition, I then adjust. So then I have my baseline of nurses, and then I send nurses home. I have nurses on call and I bring them in. Okay. The same thing can hold true for inventory. And I will say that the hybrid strategy is the most common strategy within all industries. I mean, healthcare, manufacturing, services. It's the most common strategy that's used. I worked in professional services my whole entire career, and as a management consultant. We have a hybrid strategy. We would have a bench of consultants, but whenever the demand increased for consulting engagements, when demand increased for clients that needed organizational change, with clients who needed business transformations, we had to bring in part-time contractors. We had that hybrid strategy where we had that bench of 50 consultants, but as demand increased, we had to bring in part-time consultants, contractors. So that is where you have that baseline and you adjust based on the demand. And from an inventory perspective, you have a baseline of, okay, I'm going to produce 5,000 widgets, and as demand increases, I increase those number of produced widgets, and then as demand decreases, I decrease that amount of produced widgets. So again, the three different aggregate strategies, the planning strategies, are the level strategy, the chase strategy, and the hybrid strategy. And again, the hybrid strategy is the most adopted and most used within the industry. So that is the area where people struggle within Chapter 13. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions. Let me see if I can get into the... Can't see anything. All right. There's a chat. All right, so there's no questions in the chat. So now we're going to move on to resource planning. So within resource planning, and again, this is Chapter 14. These are from the PowerPoints within Wiley Plus. And from a resource planning perspective, a lot of people struggle with the acronyms, with the different types of systems. And that is the majority of what this chapter is centered around. And I would say when we're describing ERP, CRP, and MRP, enterprise resource planning, I always say that, and I say this in the video, I say that the purpose of that system is in the name itself. It runs my enterprise. Okay, so the ERP system is where accounting, where customer service, where human resources, where engineering, where manufacturing, where logistics performs all of their transactions. That system is where you pull all of your reports when you go into the work each day. That system is where you have your key performance indicators, so you see how you're performing as well as how is your department performing. And because you are inputting data every day within the ERP system, that data is getting rolled up to the leaders of your organizations, your CFO, your CEO, your CIO, so that they can make those day-to-day, long-term and short-term managerial decisions. So if they need to make the decision of whether they're going to hire more employees, whether they're going to lay off employees, whether they're going to build a facility, those decisions are based upon the data that they pull out of the ERP system. Okay, so I always say that the ERP system is a top dog. It runs all the transactions. It performs all the visibility within the organization. And it is at the top of the hierarchy of the organization. Okay, so under that ERP umbrella, you have MRP. So you have the material requirements planning module, material requirements planning system. Again, it's in the name. It schedules and plans my materials. So whenever a customer places an order and that particular item has to be made, that information, that demand is pushed into the MRP system. And now you have to run the MRP to understand what parts you have in stock. You have to run MRP to understand what suppliers you need to get the parts from that you do not have in stock. And you also have to identify the lead time. So how long it's going to take for me to receive those parts. For example, customer service places an order within the ERP system. I place my order for my Tesla Cybertruck. That goes into Tesla's ERP system. And then my demand for my Cybertruck gets pushed into material requirements planning. So material requirements planning is going to take the tens of thousands of parts that make up a Cybertruck, and it's going to tell the planning manager at Tesla what parts they currently have in stock, what parts they need to order, and from what supplier to get those parts from. So that's essentially what MRP does. MRP schedules my materials for the operation. Okay. Another concept within management and planning is capacity requirements planning. If I can find it, give me a second. So capacity requirements planning is also in the capacity planning section. And capacity requirements planning is essentially where I'm going to plan for the capacity of my employees, of my workforce. It's going to plan for the capacity of my warehouse. So whenever I place my order for the Cybertruck, Tesla runs capacity requirements planning to see if they have enough workers to produce that truck. You can also run capacity requirements planning to say, okay, along with Justin's Cybertruck that he ordered, 50 other people ordered Cybertrucks as well in the same exact day. So now they can run capacity requirements planning to see if they have the capacity to store these trucks once they're produced. They can run capacity requirements planning to see if they have the capacity to store these raw materials that go into that truck to be stored in wait until we produce that truck before we begin to put these trucks on the assembly line. So you know, you can see how all of these systems, all of these planning systems are related to each other. So we have the ERP system at the top level. That's where I'm going to place my order on a Tesla website. That information gets sent to the ERP system. In order for Tesla to begin production on that Cybertruck, they have to run material requirements planning to see if they have the parts to even begin production on it. And once they identify when these parts are going to arrive at my warehouse or my manufacturing facility, then they can know when they can begin production. And once they get that date to begin production, then they run capacity requirements planning to say, okay, do I have these 15 employees that I need to produce Justin Cybertruck on October 1st? So again, all of these systems are interconnected. All of these systems feed information into and out of each other. And I would say from a hierarchical standpoint, ERP is at the top, and material requirements planning and capacity requirements planning are under those. They are subsets of the ERP system. They are modules within the ERP system. Okay. So that's the main area where individuals struggle within chapter 14. And I've also been told that there's questions in terms of the benefits and drawbacks to ERP applications. And I would say that the benefits of ERP systems is that it increases the visibility, collaboration, and communication of everyone throughout an organization's supply chain. So it increases the communication and collaboration with my suppliers. It increases the communication and collaboration with my customers. And it also aids in the managerial decision making of the leaders of the organization. So for example, as I said before, as you are inputting your data within the system, that information is getting pulled to the leaders so they can make their decisions. So they'll see how you are, you are doing a great job with your role, and that's how you get raises. That's how you get promotions. It's through the data of the ERP systems, along with other things, but that's an input to your employee evaluation. The data that's input in the ERP system. So the benefit, the ERP systems are very, very, very important. The drawbacks to the ERP applications is that it takes a very long time to implement these systems. On average, I would say for a large organ. So for ExxonMobil is an example here. It would take multiple years for ExxonMobil to implement an ERP system, just because of Exxon's complexity, just because of Exxon's size. I've had $100 million organization implement an ERP system in 6 months. I implemented an ERP system at Intel in a year and a half. So you have a number of different complexities that have to be considered whenever you're implementing these types of systems. They're large investments. I mean, most systems are a minimum of a minimum of $1 million investment. So and there's been stories out there where there's been failed implementations where Hershey's invested $10 million in their ERP system and it failed. But the misconception is that it's the technology, where in reality, it's the people. It's the people that lead to, and this is for within an MBA program. Those are the critical failure factors, regardless of what you're talking about. We're talking about technology here. The critical failure factor is the people and the adoption. I'm not saying the people themselves. I'm talking about the adoption, the buy-in, the acceptance. I speak with a lot of leaders, and a lot of leaders fail by simply explaining the why for a project, for an initiative. They don't explain the why. The employees become threatened because they're in fear for their jobs. They don't adopt it. The project fails. So as you progress throughout your program, think about the human element is the most important piece to influence. It's the most important piece to empowerment. It's the most important piece to adoption of your plans, of your strategies, of your technologies within your organization. And there's a few questions on that where the people aspect is very important, although you're talking about technology with ERP systems.